Everyone in the dusty little town of Redhorn knew the same old rule. The one carved into wood above the saloon door and repeated like a warning from the mountains themselves. Don't open the Blackwell Gate after sundown. Folks said it with the same tone they used to warn children about deep wells and rattlesnakes. And for decades, nobody dared test it, not even the rowdiest cowboy after 10 glasses of whiskey. But then came Elijah Crane, a stubborn rancher with shoulders broad enough to block the sunrise, and pride thick enough to choke on. He didn't come to Redhorn seeking trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him, crawling after him like a shadow he didn't ask for. Elijah bought the old Blackwell property, a stretch of land everyone else avoided like a curse. The previous owners had left without explanation, abandoning horses, equipment, and a locked iron gate at the far end of the ranch. The gate stood crooked between two blackened trees, cold as death even under the summer heat. Locals whispered that the land beyond it wasn't meant for men, that screams had been heard there at night, that once you crossed it, something followed you back. But Elijah wasn't the kind to listen to ghost stories. He believed only in sweat, cattle, and muscle. On the day he signed the land deed, the sheriff warned him again, "Don't open that gate, son. Not for cattle, not for curiosity, not for anything." Elijah laughed, tipped his hat, and shrugged it off as small-town superstition. After all, he'd dealt with wolves, droughts, wild stallions. What was one old gate going to do? But the first night on the ranch felt wrong. The air grew still, as if the wind refused to move past the Blackwell fence line. Coyotes wouldn't howl, the horses wouldn't sleep, and somewhere near the gate, Elijah heard a slow dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. He told himself it was branches, yet there were no trees near enough to drag anything. The next morning, he found claw marks, long ones, running across the metal bars of the gate. Something had scratched it. Something big. The townsfolk warned him again at the feed store, at the saloon, at the well, Don't do this, Elijah. Leave that damn gate alone." But the more they warned him, the more his pride pushed back. No outsider, no spooked townsfolk, and certainly no rusty old gate was going to control him or his land. So that night, while the moon rose swollen and red behind the hills, Elijah saddled his horse and rode out to the Blackwell Gate with a lantern in hand. The wind howled like a warning, but he ignored it. He stepped off the horse, grabbed the freezing metal latch, and said the words that would change everything. "I don't believe in your damn stories." Then he unhooked the lock and pushed the gate open. The hinges screeched like something waking from a long sleep. The horses at the barn screamed. The air turned colder than winter, and as the gate swung wide, the lantern flame died instantly, leaving him in choking darkness. Something moved inside the trees, slow, tall, deliberate. Elijah tried to step back, but a heavy thud shook the ground in front of him. Then another and another, until two glowing, unnatural eyes rose from the shadows like embers of hell itself. The creature exhaled a breath that smelled of soil and centuries, and the ground beneath Elijah's boots trembled. Every warning the town had given him echoed in his head. "Don't do this. Don't open it. Don't disturb what sleeps there." But it was too late. The thing beyond the gate was awake, and it wasn't going back. Elijah froze, every instinct in his body screaming for him to run. Yet his boots felt nailed to the earth as that towering silhouette took shape, rising higher than any man, horse or bear he had ever seen. The creature's eyes glowed like molten iron, unblinking, fixed on him with a hunger that felt ancient, patient, and terribly intelligent. Elijah's breath came out in a fog, though the night was warm, and the cold wrapped around him like a wet burial cloth. Behind him, his horse yanked at its reins, panicking violently until the leather snapped and it bolted back toward the ranch, leaving Elijah alone, lantern dead, standing in the dark, with the thing he had been warned about since the first day he'd arrived. He finally forced his hand toward the revolver at his hip, but before he could pull it, the creature moved with a speed that blurred reality. One moment it stood 10 feet away, the next it was inches from him, its breath rolling out over his face like the stench of 1,000 rotting forests. A low rumbling growl came from deep within its chest, vibrating the very air between them. Elijah stumbled back, slipping on the cold dirt, clawing at the ground to push himself away. The creature didn't strike. It simply watched him, as if judging him, testing him. Then slowly, its massive hand clawed, elongated, covered with something like bark fused with bone, reached toward Elijah. He scrambled upright and sprinted toward the gate, heart hammering so hard it hurt, nearly tripping as he shoved himself through the opening and slammed the iron shut behind him. The moment the gate clanged closed, the creature unleashed a scream, so deep and furious it felt, like the world itself split open. Birds erupted from the trees in a frenzy. Dust rose from the ground. Elijah staggered back, trembling, staring as two massive hands wrapped around the bars and shook the entire gate violently. But the creature did not cross. It roared, thrashed, and then after a long, shuddering pause, slowly retreated into the shadows, its glowing eyes dimming until they vanished completely. Elijah fell to his knees, chest heaving, every inch of him soaked in cold sweat. He knew then that the town had never been lying, never exaggerating, if anything. They had softened the truth. What waited behind the Blackwell Gate wasn't a ghost, or a legend, or some harmless old myth. It was real. And now it was awake. At dawn, Elijah staggered back into town, pale and shaken, barely able to walk straight. Folks stared at him with a mix of pity and anger because they already knew. They didn't need to hear a confession. The creature's scream had echoed across Redhorn in the night, rattling windows and waking sleeping babies. By the time Elijah reached the sheriff's office, half the town was already gathered there. The sheriff stepped out onto the porch, crossed his arms, and shook his head like a man watching a train wreck he'd predicted. "You opened it, didn't you?" he said. Elijah tried to speak, but his throat felt tight and scraped raw, so he only nodded. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. People whispered, "He's doomed us, so why didn't he listen? What happens now?" The sheriff's jaw tightened as he looked the rancher dead in the eyes. "You didn't just open a gate, son," he said. "You woke something that was buried for a reason." Elijah tried to explain what he saw: the size, the breath, the eyes, but the sheriff raised a hand. "We know exactly what you saw." And when Elijah asked what the creature was, the sheriff didn't answer. Instead, he told the crowd, "Board your windows. Bring your livestock in. No one goes out after dark until I say otherwise." The town scattered in a panic. Doors slammed. Lanterns lit. Children were dragged inside. Elijah followed the sheriff into his office, desperate, shaken, and furious at himself. The sheriff poured him a drink and said quietly, "You need to understand something. Crane. The Blackwell land wasn't abandoned because of drought or taxes. That thing. It took whole families before the mine sealed it in. The gate was built to keep it contained when it broke free the first time. And now you've opened its cage." Elijah felt his stomach twist. His pride evaporated. For the first time in his life, he felt genuine fear, not for himself, but for every innocent person in Redhorn. That night, townsfolk huddled indoors, candles burning low, doors barred, listening for the heavy steps of something monstrous. And as the moon rose high, the ground began to tremble. Elijah and the sheriff stood at the window of the office, guns loaded, praying the creature would stay beyond the gate. But then came the sound, metal bending, twisting, groaning. The sheriff's face went white. Elijah's heart stopped. The creature was trying to break through.